I welcome you all to the third lecture of module 1, and the title of today's lecture is Biology of Stress. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me have a brief recap of the lecture 2, that is previous lecture. So, in the last lecture we discussed various characteristics of stress. So, we have discussed that stress is subjective and largely subjective, and it can be self created. We have also discussed that stress is an everyday phenomena, because on day to day basis we all experience stress. So, it is not something and exclusively happens only when only in certain occasions. We have also discussed that stress can have additive or cumulative effects, which basically means when we have multiple stressful events in a day, and all may have a cumulative effect on our system, mind and body. We have also discussed that stress can be influenced by culture, primarily because culture influences our thought processes, interpretation processes. So, in that sense culture can also influence how we interpret a situation. We have also discussed that stress can have spillover effect, with the idea that stress can get transferred from one domain of life to another domain of life, like from workplace to family life. So, that is called as spillover effect. We have also discussed that stress can be contagious, in the sense that stress can transfer from one person to another person, particularly people who are close to us. So, it is a kind of contagious in that sense. We have also discussed the different types of stress. Most importantly, we have discussed acute stress versus chronic stress. We have also discussed distress versus eustress. So, these are different ways of categorizing stress. We have discussed all these things in the last lecture. We have also discussed various sources of stress. Particularly, we have discussed the frustrations in life can be a source of stress. Conflicts in various situations of life can also lead to stressful experiences. Certain life changes can be very stressful, and also we have discussed pressure to perform in a situation, or pressure to conform to a norms or something can also be stressful. So, these are some of the major concepts that we have discussed in the last lecture. So, today we will discuss the biology of stress, so physiological aspect of stress. The key concepts that we will discuss in today's lecture include fight or flight response, general adaptation syndrome, stress brain body pathways, and lastly gender differences in stress response. So, let us start one by one. So, stressful experiences are always associated with certain physiological changes in the body. So, we have already tried to understand the mental experiences. We will also look into more detail about the mind body interaction. So, the mental experiences of the stress directly influences your physiology or the body. So, stress is always associated with certain changes in the body level. So, some of these physiological changes we will discuss, which are commonly associated with stressful experiences. So, one response, physiological response, which is very common, is called as fight or flight response. So, this was coined by a scientist named Walter Cannon in 1932, who first described body's reaction to stress in terms of fight or flight response. So, this is also called as acute stress response. So, mostly whenever there is an acute stress, then generally the body responds with the fight or flight response. It basically is a kind of physiological reaction of the body as a result of any threat or stressful situations. So, in the fight or flight response, it mobilizes and prepares body either for fight, or you just stand and fight with the situation, or If it is not possible to fight, then you run away or flee, which is called as flight when confronted by a threat. So, this is a typical physiological reaction that happens. Body kinds of prepares you to fight or run away from the situation, and mostly this response happens, or it is mediated by autonomic nervous system, and specifically one part of autonomic nervous system called sympathetic nervous system. So, let us very briefly talk about the structure of nervous system in order to understand what is autonomic nervous system and what is sympathetic nervous system. So, if you look at human nervous system, so it is divided into two parts. One is called as central nervous system and one is called as peripheral nervous system. So, central nervous system includes brain and spinal cord. So, these are the two components of central nervous system. All the remaining nervous system is called as peripheral nervous system, which includes all nerves outside the brain and spinal cord, and it includes sensory and motor neurons. So, apart from brain and spinal cord, all the other aspects of nervous system are collectively called as peripheral nervous system. So, then peripheral nervous system is again divided into two parts. One is called as somatic nervous system and another part is called as autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system basically conducts nerve impulses from central nervous system to skeletal muscles. So, it conducts nerve impulses from central nervous system to the skeletal muscles, and it primarily controls all the voluntary function. For example, I am moving my hand, I am walking with my legs. So, all these voluntary functions are primarily done by somatic nervous system. Then the other part is called autonomic nervous system. It basically conducts nerve impulses from central nervous system to various internal organs and glands. So, heart, various glands like thyroid gland, pancreas, etc., etc. So, all the internal organs and glands are connected by controlled by autonomic nervous system, and these are mostly involuntary functions performed. Autonomic nervous system functions are primarily involuntary functions because we cannot control them. These are beyond our control. So, we cannot control heartbeat and other things, for example. So, because that is why it is called as autonomic nervous system. So, it controls functions such as heart rate, digestion, perspiration, etc. Now, autonomic nervous system is again divided into two parts. One is called as sympathetic nervous system and one is called as parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is basically it activates body or it arouses body, stimulates body, and to mobilize all the resources. So, whenever we get activated and lot of energy comes because there is a threat in front of us, then it is primarily done by the sympathetic part of the nervous system. So, this fight and flight response is primarily done by this. Whenever we encounter a stressful situation, sympathetic nervous system gets activated and it activates all the physiological aspects such as increase in the heart rate, perspiration, etc., etc. Parasympathetic nervous system on the other hand, it kind of does the opposite of sympathetic nervous system. When the body gets aroused by sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system tries to maintain balance by decreasing the arousal of the body system. So, it tries to conserve bodily resources such as it slows heart rate and other things. So, if I just try to draw very roughly, if we consider human brain, Let us consider this is human brain. So, central nervous system includes brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous systems basically goes from brain and spinal cord to all the other parts of the body. So, nerves will be kind of, it will be, so different branches, it will connect to our hands, different body parts. So, it will go to our hands. So, different nerves will go, different internal organs, then it will go to different parts of our leg. So, all these branches are basically part of our peripheral nervous system. So, if you just kind of make an analogy with the electric grid system, then central nervous system is like powerhouse that gives you power, and peripheral nervous system is more like cables that connect power highs with the different parts of the city. So, similarly brain and spinal cord is the powerhouse, and it connects with the different nerves with the different parts of the body and internal organs using peripheral nervous system. So, this is like that only. So, fight and flight response is basically a kind of survival mechanism. It is a body's way of dealing with the threat. So, it helps us to survive in a threatening situation, in a stressful situation, and this is very rapid, and it happens very unconsciously. We may not be consciously aware, but whenever there is a threat in front of us, we encounter a threat, body automatically activates sympathetic part of nervous system, and it mobilizes energies, distributes energy to the different parts of the body wherever it is required. Physical symptoms during the flight and flight response primarily include heartbeat increases, muscle get tensed, mouth becomes dry, dilation of pupil of the eye, sweating of the palms, and these are some of the common symptoms that we experience when undergoing stressful circumstances. So, typically in the fight or flight response, these are the common symptoms that we experience. Now, once the threat is over, we have discussed that parasympathetic nervous system tries to return the body to normal relaxed state, because body cannot stay in that aroused state for a long time because it is very exhausting. So, parasympathetic nervous system tries to bring body to the normal relaxed state. So, Walter Cannon used the term homeostasis mechanism, that body always tries to maintain its equilibrium by bringing back to a normal state. So, this is called as homeostasis mechanism. Otherwise, body will not be able to survive for a long time if it is in the aroused state for a long time. So, parasympathetic nervous system tries to maintain that balance. Another important thing is that fight or flight response can happen in the face of an actual danger, such as let us say you see suddenly a snake in front of you. So, this is an actual danger. So, body will show fight and flight response, but it can also be body can show all the symptoms of fight and flight response to an imagined threat also. Let us say you want to appear for a public speech, or you want to give a presentation in front of people. So, just imagining such a task can become you can become stressed by that, simply because when depending on your interpretation process, which we have discussed. So, because brain cannot make difference between actual threat and an imagined threat, the body will react in a very similar fashion. So, this is one important reaction response of the physiological response of the body called fight and flight response. Next, another physiological response of the body which is called as general adaptation syndrome, or in short term it is called as GAS. Now, this was proposed by one endocrinologist. His name was Hans Selye, who was one of the founding researcher in the field of stress, and he studied changes in the body's physiology in the reaction to stress. Mostly he was doing research with the rats obviously, and then it was found it was similar changes happens in the human body also. So, what kind of physiological changes happens as we, or what are the stages of changes that happens when we encounter short term and long term stress. So, fight and flight is primarily in terms of short term or acute stress, but what happens when stress persists for a long time, what are the stages that our body goes through. So, general adaptation syndrome tries to explain that. So, Hans Selye summarized body's short and long term reaction to stress in a 3 stages or 3 phased process called as general adaptation syndrome. So, first stage is called as alarm reaction. So, alarm reaction is basically when you first encounter a stress or threat, then it is typically fight or flight response that we experience is alarm stage. So, once you recognize a threat, here essentially it is fight and flight response that occurs, and there are physiological changes associated with it that we have just discussed. So, alarm reaction is typically fight and flight response. The next phase is called as the stage of resistance or resistance stage. So, what happens after the initial alarm reaction, the body begins to repair itself, or parasympathetic nervous system tries to cool down and bring back to the normal state, and body tries to enter into the recovery phase for a while, but still it remains in a very vigilant state. So, if you overcome stress, then it is fine, then there is no problem, but if stress continues beyond fight and flight response, then the body enters into the stage of resistance, and here body tries to adapt and learns how to live with the higher stress level or continued stress level, and it makes various changes and adaptations in the body in order to reduce the effect of stress. For example, body continues to secrete various stress hormones. We will discuss what are the stress hormones and all these things in the just after some time, and tries to maintain high blood pressure. It includes signs of you may experience symptoms of irritability, frustrations, poor concentration, etc. during the phase of resistance stage. So, body tries to resist to higher stress level or continued stress level, tries to fight it, and and by again mobilizing other various resources by secretion of stress hormones, etc., etc. So, this is a kind of continued fighting stage of the body. So, body resists to all these changes. The next stage is called the exhaustion stage. In the stage of exhaustion, if the stress is not resolved in second stage and it continues for a long time, then for substantial amount of time, one may enters into the stage of exhaustion. Here the body's resistance to stress gradually decreases, because body was trying to fight for a long time in the resistance stage, but there is a limit to it, and slowly the resistance slows down and decreases. Sometimes it may collapse very quickly and reduce our immune functions. So, we will look into all these other aspects also when we talk about how stress influences our health. So, this is the stage where various diseases, physical diseases may may appear in our body because of collapse of resistance. So, for example, people may experience symptoms of ulcers, high blood pressure, etc., etc. So, most of the so this is the most dangerous stage. That is why we have discussed that chronic stress is most problematic stress, because when it continues, stress continues for a long time, the body enters in the stage of exhaustion and it is not able to resist anymore, and it is in this stage that many diseases may appear in the body because of inability of the body to fight. So, various heart diseases, ulcers, high blood pressures, etc., etc. So, here typically some of the symptoms one may experience, such as fatigue, burnout, decrease of stress resistance, etc. And our body's immune system may go down. So, we will look into the mechanism of immune system and stress also. So, these are some of the stages or primary stages that our body goes through when we experience stress. So, it may start with alarm reaction, then the body enters, if it continues, enters into resistance stage. However, if body is not able to resolve stress at that stage and it continues, then the body enters into exhaustion stage, where the body kind of exhausts all its energy and resources, and the body, this is the phase where diseases, physical diseases may be experienced by the people. So, diagrammatically this can be shown. So, if you have a graph like this, so graphically we can present these three stages like that. So, this is one side we are showing the resistance to stress, and one time as the time progresses. So, initially we have alarm stage, there is not much resistance at this stage, the body just starts showing the symptoms of fight and flight. Then slowly the resistance increases as the time passes, and then after certain time the resistance starts decreasing, and sometimes it may collapse very quickly. So, this is the phase of exhaustion, where the resistance goes down very quickly and or slowly. So, graphically we can just present these stages like this. Now, let us talk about how stress is connected to brain and body. What are the the detailed pathways through which stress influences our body and brain, and ultimately it leads to various symptoms in the body. So, this is a diagrammatic representation of how stress is connected to our brain and body. So, if you see, when someone experiences stress, one thing is one part of our brain, small part of our human brain called amygdala, it gets activated. Amygdala is primarily responsible for emotional processing. So, whenever we get distress, so there is an emotional distress, amygdala get activated, and then it sends signal to hypothalamus, another part of the human brain, and which is kind of a control center in the brain, and it kind of controls other body parts. So, we will see how it controls other body parts. So, if you see in a diagram, so amygdala will be somewhere no? So, amygdala is somewhere here and hypothalamus is somewhere here. So, during the stress amygdala gets activated and then it sends signal to hypothalamus. So, hypothalamus then what happens? It activates two pathways. One pathway is called as SAM system. So, hypothalamus, once hypothalamus gets activated, it activates two pathways which ultimately ends up in releasing various stress hormones. So, one pathway is called as SAM pathways, which basically means sympathetic adrenal medullary system. So, this is called as sympathetic adrenal medullary path system. What happens here? Hypothalamus activates autonomic nervous system, particularly the sympathetic part of nervous system, and sympathetic nervous system then activates adrenal medulla. So, adrenal, there is a gland called adrenal gland because it is near to kidney. Renal basically means kidney and it is near to kidney. So, that is why it is called as adrenal gland. So, we can kind of you can see here diagram. This is these are the two glands which are called as adrenal gland. So, they are just above the kidney. These are small two small structures above the kidney, they are called adrenal gland. So, sympathetic nervous system activates adrenal medulla. Medulla basically adrenal gland or every gland has a outer layer called cortex, called adrenal cortex, and the inner part is called as medulla. So, autonomic nervous system activates the inner part of adrenal gland called adrenal medulla, and this inner part of adrenal gland secretes a group of hormones called as catecholamines, which basically includes hormones such as adrenaline, which is also called as epinephrine. So, it is called as adrenaline, which is also called as epinephrine, and another is called as So, this group includes these hormones called adrenaline and non-adrenaline. So, adrenaline is a very common very popular hormones, most of you know. When we get highly activated, we want to enhance our performance, people say it is an adrenaline rush that you get highly activated. So, these hormones when they are released in the blood, they does some functions such as increase cardiovascular response, they increase respiration rate, they increase our perspiration rate, they increase blood flow to active muscles, increase muscle strength, increase mental activities. So, these are some of the functions that are done by this adrenaline and non-adrenaline. So, which are released by the medulla or the inner part of adrenal gland. So, this is one part or one pathway by which stress releases hormones in the body and which ultimately does some functions in the body. In the another pathway which is called as HPA, which basically means hypothalamic pituitary adrenocortical pathway. So, what happens? Hypothalamus in another also activates pituitary gland. So, pituitary gland is basically it is a small gland located just below hypothalamus, and it is called as a master gland because it controls all the other glands. So, pituitary glands once it is activated, it releases a hormone called as adrenocorticotropic hormone, which in short it is called as ACTH. This hormone activates adrenal cortex. So, basically, so this outer layer cortex, sympathetic nervous system activates this medulla inner part, adrenal cortex, adrenocorticotropic hormone ACTH activates this outer layer called cortex part, and this cortex then releases a group of hormones that is called as corticosteroids. One example is called as cortisol. So, when this hormone called cortisol is released in the blood, it activates certain functions in the body, such as increased mobilization of protein and fat, increased access to energy storage, decreased inflammation, and all these are the functions that are done by these hormones. So, this pathway, same pathway, this part is actually is very quick, it is very fast. It is very quick, and mostly it activates within 1 minute of a threat. So, this is very quick. So, it is basically acute stress whenever there is a stress, and immediately body prepares. So, this pathway is very quick, and it immediately gets into the gets activated and does all the functions. This part is relatively slow. It may take about 30 minutes to get activated, and it is primarily works when under the chronic stress condition. So, whenever we face chronic stress, primarily this path becomes more active. So, so both slow and quick pathways gets activated when we encounter stressful situation. So, and ultimately both the pathways releases stress hormones in the blood, and they ultimately kind of mobilizes body and gives energy and resources, and it is distributed in the parts of the body where it is necessary. Next we will see how specifically stress is connected to the brain. So, we have seen overall in the different how it is related to hormones and release of hormones. Now, we will see how some of the research findings related specifically to how it influences our brain when we experience stress. Now, stress influences two major part of human brain. One is called as prefrontal cortex, and another is called as hippocampus. Now, so if you see the cortex of the brain, so outer part of the brain, so the front is called prefrontal cortex, and hippocampus is another small organ or small part in the human brain, which is responsible for learning, memory and emotions also. So, these two parts are particularly, as far as some of the recent research shows, that they are influenced by stress experiences. So, what happens is that chronic release of stress hormones. So, let us say stress, particularly in the chronic stress, and that HPA axis becomes more active, which releases cortisol. So, chronic stress particularly leads to the release of cortisol, which adversely influences both prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive functions such as memory, decision making, regulation of thoughts and emotions. So, all the higher brain functions which are related to thinking, memory functions, so they will be adversely affected by chronic stress, because it adversely affects prefrontal cortex. And the hippocampus, by influencing it, it will influence our learning and memory and emotions also. So, basically stress, by influencing our brain, it will adversely affect various functions or disrupt various functions such as emotions, memory functions, learning ability, decision making, regulation of thoughts and emotion, and etc. So, in a study by Justin B in 2018 found that high level of blood cortisol was associated with poorer memory, cognitive functionings, particularly for the woman. Obviously, it was there for men also, but it was more pronounced with the women sample. It was also associated with lower total cerebral brain volume. So, this Justin B and his colleagues basically they collected data from 2231 healthy middle aged people, and they kind of collected their cortisol level from the blood and various cognitive functions, and from that they found this findings that cortisol level is associated with you know poorer memory and cognitive functions. So, another this study also shows that there it is possible that it can shrink in terms of physical volume of the brain, particularly prefrontal cortex of the brain. So, as the earlier studies also suggest that chronic stress has a shrinking effect of the prefrontal cortex. Shrinking effect means actually it reduces the physical volume of the prefrontal cortex. How it can do it? By by a function, by a phenomena called as neural atrophy, that is by killing or removing some of the neurons in the brain. So, basically particularly cortisol is responsible for this kind of thing. It adversely affects the functioning of prefrontal cortex by making even structural change such as neural atrophy in the region, particularly prefrontal cortex. So, it can actually physically shrink the prefrontal cortex of the brain by killing neurons in that region. So, chronic stress also increases the activity of amygdala, which is primarily responsible for emotional reactions, and it makes it very hyperactive. So, as a result, it may predispose people to be in the constant state of fight or flight response. So, what happens is when under emotional situations, particularly stressful situation, so all the energy mostly gets to certain parts of the brain, particularly which are responsible for emotional aspects such as amygdala, and other part of brain may not have much energy such as prefrontal cortex, because so it may hamper higher cognitive functioning such as thinking, decision making, etc. So, stress can have this kind of particularly specific impact on human brain, and it particularly influences certain as part of the brain as far as some of the research shows, and it can even physically kill some neurons in some part of the brain such as prefrontal cortex. Some research also shows that stress can disrupt synaptic regulation. So, synapse is basically the junction between two neurons is called synapse, and synaptic regulation means the connection between one neuron to another. This is how through neural impulse, this is how messages are passed through synaptic connections. So, stress can kind of has an as adverse impact on synaptic regulation. Also, some research at least shows brain cell connectivity may be disrupted. So, for example, some of the research done by Vendor, Koji and others in 2014, they show stress can disrupt synaptic regulation, resulting in the loss of sociability and avoidance of interaction with others, and may impact our memory functions. So, this particular research they found a particular enzyme called MMP9, which is triggered by stress reaction and attacks molecule in the hippocampus, which is responsible for regulating synapse. So, it kind of by attacking hippocampus, it disrupts synaptic regulation. So, this is also another finding that is shows how stress can influence our brain. Now, some of the research also shows there is a possibility of gender difference in the reaction of stress response, particularly in the fight and flight response. So, generally research shows fight and flight response is a kind of primary physiological response generally shown by all individuals, and it is a kind of universal thing. However, some of the research, some specific research particularly by Taylor and his colleagues in 2000 also found that the response fight and flight response may be little bit different in the case of females, and it is more marked by another phenomena called as tend and befriend. Although fight and flight response can be there, but female shows more prominent tend and befriend symptoms when they encounter stress, particularly acute stress. So, what is the meaning of this is that this theory suggests that under stress females show more tending behavior, which basically means by giving more attention to nurturing activities or nurturant activities such as caring for the offspring and dependents. So, tending behavior gets activated in the females, particularly for offspring and the dependents, people who are dependent on them, to protect and reduce stress. So, they show one aspect is tending behavior to reduce their stress level, and also they show befriending behavior under stressful circumstances more by creating and maintaining social network to aid in the process of protection and reducing stress. So, they kind of tend to try to maintain social network and get aid in the process of protection, which can help in the process of protection. Now, at least some biological evidence shows that it is possible that females show more tend and befriend symptoms under stress reaction more than males. One evidence comes from biological support of this theory, at least partially comes from the release of oxytocin hormone, which is mainly produced in the hypothalamus. So, oxytocin is also released as a response to stress, but it is more influentially among females. So, it is oxytocin also released under stress, but it is more released among females, and this oxytocin hormone it functions in terms of calming the females. So, it helps you to calm by reducing anxiety, and promotes this hormones also promotes affiliative behavior such as grooming, touching, bonding behavior. So, at least this is one of the partial support of support for tend and befriend symptom for females under stress. So, there can be an evolutionary reason also why this is possible, is that throughout the history females have been primarily they are responsible for caring offspring. So, this is one of the primary tasks that females have been doing, and therefore, if they typically involve in fight and flight response under threat, then it may not be evolutionarily functional, because if they fight they may be injured and become unable to defend their offspring. If they flee also, then their offspring is left unprotected. So, for females particularly engaging in fight and flight response is not, it may endanger species. So, that was one of the evolutionary reason possible, that is why they show little bit different symptoms, probably tend and befriend, which helps in protecting the offspring and maintaining the species. So, this could be also another way of looking at it, but fight and flight response is very much a universal and all people show it, but tend and befriend may be more prominent among females as compared to males. With this we end today's lecture. Thank you.